If you're come across as a problem solver, you're a dead duck in a primary. A moderate cannot win a primary. It's kind of a luxury that I don't have to answer to one party or the other's groups. I call them as I see them. People are now looking for confirmation rather than information. Information is the lifeblood of democracy. And if the information stream is polluted, you're not going to have good decisions being made. I don't want to get to a place where the government is the truth police. We need to be better consumers of information. We need to be more skeptical.
When people are seeing their elected officials being so partisan, I think it creates a permission structure for everyone else to be the same.
One of our tremendous asymmetric advantages in the world is allies. China has customers. We have allies. People that founded this country didn't want a king. I mean, they had just fought a war against a king. People say, well, Trump is trying to be a dictator. I think he thinks he is.
Senator Angus King, welcome to the People's Cabinet.
Great to be with you, Dan. Good to have a chance to chat.
Thank you. We have a lot to cover today, but I want to start. We're in a time, I think, of extreme partisanship. I think people always like to say that, but I think in particularly now. You left the Democratic Party in '93, is that correct?
Correct.
And so, in particular, as an independent, I'd love to get your take on how you've seen parties continually divide and where you see the state of politics today.
Well, I thought it was divisive in 1993, but it's nothing compared with what it is today. And there are a couple of problems, Dan, that have really accelerated this. One is the demonization of one's opponents. It used to be you had political opponents. Now you have political enemies. And the language that's being used to characterize people as scum, as Marxists, as people that hate America is it further divides. And that's one of the things that's really harming the country. And let me give you a little inside look at what's happening here. What I believe is one of the most serious problems we have is the tyranny of the primary, where the average turnout in a primary across the country is 21% of the voters. Who are those 21%? On the Democratic side, they're the most progressive, most to the left. On the Republican side, right now they're the most Trumpist, most MAGA. And here's the danger. You can lose your primary not because of your position on immigration or abortion or some other policy issue. You can lose because you're perceived as not being sufficiently hostile to the other side. If you're come across as a problem solver, as somebody who will compromise, who will listen to the other side and try to get a problem resolved, you're a dead duck in a primary. A moderate cannot win a primary. It's very difficult. And so we get people coming here who are literally afraid to talk, who are afraid to be, it's almost like being afraid to be seen with somebody from the other side because that'll turn into a 30-second ad in their primary 2, 4, 6 years later. And this whole institution, our whole government is based on the idea of different people coming together with different points of view and working them out, usually involving compromise. And that's becoming more and more difficult. It's no accident that right now, at this moment, in the U.S. Senate, we're talking about the major legislative bill of the year, utterly one party. No discussion, no negotiation. It's 100% from Republicans in the House, Republicans in the Senate, and that's not the way this place is supposed to work. Now, I can't wrap myself in the cloak of righteousness here because I voted for the Inflation Reduction Act, which was a reconciliation bill. So there's no purity here, but I'm afraid this is becoming the pattern where the majority basically says it's our way or the highway, and it really diminishes our ability to make lasting policy changes. Whatever happens in this bill in the next couple of weeks, if there's a Democratic administration and a turnover of the Congress, which does happen, it'll get reversed. So it affects our country from a point of view of consistent policy as well as no input from other voices.
And I know you weren't in D.C. at the time, but could you see the beginnings or the acceleration of that partisanship when you decided to become an independent? What was that decision for you?
Well, it was the decision was I grew up as a Democrat, although for 15 years in Maine, from the 70s into the 90s, I was a public broadcasting TV host. I was sort of the Judy Woodruff of Maine for 15 years. So even though I was registered as a Democrat, I didn't have a partisan cast. I'd go to Democratic and Republican conventions as a reporter, not as a participant. But I was also in that always was a part-time. I was in business, and I sort of became more conservative in terms of things like regulation and tax policy. And there were things I just didn't agree with the Democrats about. On the other hand, I didn't agree with the Republicans about social policy. And being an independent, it worked. And I can tell you it's kind of a luxury that I don't have to answer to one party or the other's groups, pressure groups, financial groups. If I had to put my philosophy on a bumper sticker, it would be I call them as I see them. And that's a pretty good place to be. When I was elected governor, it was right at the same time that Newt Gingrich and the so-called Republican Revolution occurred in the House in the 90s. And that has really sort of reverberated through our politics, where politics isn't competition, it's war. And that's very destructive.
And have you ever regretted the decision, or were there times in which I would assume more the Democratic Party would try to recruit you back?
I've never regretted the decision. I mean, if any Republican watching this will say, well, he's really three-quarters of a Democrat anyway, and I do vote with the Democrats far more frequently, but that's because the parties have shifted so far since the time that I made this decision back in the 90s. I once went back and looked at my vetoes as governor. Almost all of them were Democratic bills, and the vetoes were upheld by Republicans. Because I think the Democrats knew they could do stuff they knew I would save them from, but that's another story. But no, I vote more with the Democrats now because I think they're more right now. I mean, the Republicans aren't giving me much that I feel like very positive about voting for.
It's interesting. I'm from Massachusetts, and I think there's a reputation of Massachusetts being a blue state, which obviously it is from a presidential perspective, but we have a record of Republican governors, Charlie
Mitt
Baker,
Romney,
Bill
Weld,
Paul Cellucci, and the majority of voters in elections are unenrolled voters. As a matter of fact,
Right.
A lot of them will pull a ballot in the primary, vote, and then will actively unenroll themselves again. And I think actually it is representative of a lot of people in this country.
Sure.
A lot of them who aren't even coming out.
Well,
in the
that
primary.
figure of 21% in the
Right.
primaries tells you a lot. That means if you add those together, that means 60% of the country doesn't feel all that strongly.
And I think even people with party affiliations, they look at their neighbors. They don't see if they're a Democrat and their neighbor's Republican. I don't think that they view that neighbor with the same kind of vitriol that, candidly, no disrespect to your colleagues, is being set with social media and all that. So my question to you is how do we have environments? Not to say that it isn't hard to be an independent in Maine, but how do we create an environment where I'm not even suggesting that everyone should be independent, but what I am suggesting is that we have a more reasonable approach to respecting differences and figuring out ways to move forward together, because I think that's what most Americans want, is finding ways to find common ground and move forward.
Well, I think, frankly, I was elected in Maine in 1994 because there had been, I think for the first time, a government shutdown. We had a Republican governor, a Democratic Speaker of the House. They absolutely couldn't get along. There was a government shutdown. People were really fed up, and here comes this guy from the outside, a business guy, and that was what I think elected me. By 1%, by the way. It was no landslide. But right now, we're moving further and further apart. And it's a combination. One of the big changes that we've sort of lived through that we don't really observe is what I call the balkanization of the news business. It used to be that everybody got their news from one person, Walter Cronkite. Now you can go to whatever news channel you like in terms of what you're going to hear. And Lord knows the internet is exactly the same way. The algorithm will send you down whatever rabbit hole you begin. And somebody said to me recently that I thought this was a hell of a good insight. People are now looking for confirmation rather than information, affirmation rather than information. And that's a dangerous place because, in my experience, you can't solve problems until you have some agreement on the facts. If you can sit 10 people around a table and agree on the facts, then the resolution becomes fairly easy. But if people don't share the same information, it's almost impossible. And that's where we are in this country today. I'll never forget in 2016, I went to a forum and some reporters were talking about the campaign. It was right before the election, Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. And one of the reporters had, I thought, a really important insight. He said, I've been following these two candidates around the country for a year, and I've decided that they're running for president of two different countries. Isn't that's an interesting insight? And we now have our country is in different factual universes. Los Angeles is a perfect example where a lot of people, what the images they see on their chosen media are burning cars, Mexican flags, smoke, tear gas, and other folks are seeing pictures of people marching and singing and being peaceful. I talked to a friend the other day who said, I literally don't know what the reality is in Los Angeles. And if information is the lifeblood of democracy, and if the information stream is polluted, you're not going to have good decisions being made in elections, which is our ultimate source of authority.
So how do we fix that, right? Because, I don't have to tell you this as someone who was a host at one point. Traditional linear TV ratings are down. Podcasts, for my sake, not a bad thing. Listenership is up. But as you say, at least now we're seeing a trend, especially with the big tech platforms, of fact-checking going by the wayside. We saw Mark Zuckerberg literally celebrating that.
Right.
You see on social media on X, Elon Musk celebrating that X is the number one news source in the United States. But then on that same feed, you'll see something that is blatantly false that will have 3-4 million views, and there'll be no community note, no fact checking. So how do we fix that?
And compound that with AI that can create images that look absolutely real, and you can no longer believe your eyes unless you're there. I've thought a lot about that. I don't want to get to a place where the government is the truth police, where the government or some agency decides what can go on Facebook or X or whatever it is. It sounds sort of like a cop-out, but I think the only answer is education. Starting very early, kids in the third grade who are doing, they use the internet, teaching them what I call digital literacy, how to work on getting different sources and to be skeptical, to be not just believe the first thing you see, and to teach young people how to use the internet and for its value, which is tremendous, but not be taken in by one side or the other. As I say, I think I wish there was some really simple solution, but there just isn't. We need to be better consumers of information. We need to be more skeptical. My rule of thumb is if I get an email with a headline that seems unbelievable, it probably is, and that you should seek another source. But that's a long-term project. Right now, we're in the midst of this information war, and the public is losing.
And to the point earlier about how Washington and Capitol Hill can feed the flames, social media has created an incentive structure, in my opinion at least, for especially those with significant followings like you and many of your fellow members of Congress to be more partisan, right? Because they'll get more shares, they'll get more clicks,
right,
all of those kind of things. And so, and for many members of Congress, more fundraising comes with that, right? And so I think, in my opinion at least, social media has created this accelerant for partisanship.
No question.
What incentives, as someone who has been a part of D.C. for a while, who has been a governor, what incentives do you think we could create so that, candidly, our elected officials are better examples, right? Because you talk about schools, but then also when people are seeing their elected officials being so partisan, I think it creates a permission structure for everyone else to be the same.
Oh, there's no question. I mean, I think that's one of the political discourse has been debased. And you mentioned social media, but let's also talk about the regular media. if you think about it, Fox News and MSNBC are essentially in the same business, which is keeping people angry from different points of view. But boring old news isn't what draws viewers. It's opinion. It's feeding people, telling people what they want to hear. Confirmation bias is what's going on, and that's a business proposition. I mean, they're in business. We forget that their job is to have a lot of viewers so they can sell advertising for a higher price, and what draws viewers is anger, and that's part of the business model, which I think is unfortunate. Social media is the same way. I have a pretty successful Instagram, not by Cory Booker standards, but I have 30 or 40,000 followers. But my Instagram is rarely partisan, or it's not even political very much. I mean, it's what I try to do is share with people in Maine what my life in Washington is like, and vice versa. But people are engaged and angry, and that's what's driving clicks and eyeballs.
So as an independent, I think you have a particular authority and credibility in the answer to the next question I have for you, which is, and candidly, I've heard a lot of people say about their consumption of news something similar, which is, there is conservative beliefs, there are democratic beliefs, there are policy issues that people are disagreeing with, and then there's Donald Trump and the example that he is espousing, the policies that he is espousing. You have a JD, the kind of takes that he is putting on the law. So I want to get to, you have put together a list of how to wreck a country. And as an independent, you've seen some policy ideas that you would probably perceive to be coming from the conservative side, so to speak, and democratic ones as well. I don't mean to go through all 16 with them on this podcast, but I want to get your take just in general on, do you see Donald Trump as different than a Republican president who you may disagree with on certain policy issues? And if so, how should the average voter be thinking about the policies that we're seeing from Donald Trump?
Well, the big difference in what's going on now, and I think one of the reasons my Republican colleagues aren't really reacting to a lot of what's going on, is that they do view that what's going on is just politics as usual. King is 3/4 of a Democrat, so he's attacking Trump, or the Democrats are attacking Trump, and the Republicans attack the Democrats, and that kind of thing. I don't like a lot of the policies, but I'm more concerned about how they're going about what they're doing. And that's what really troubles me on a deeper level than a particular policy. And that is essentially skirting, if not outright, violating the terms of the Constitution. The fundamental premise of the Constitution is the division of power. The people that founded this country didn't want a king. I mean, they had just fought a war against a king. And if you read, it's interesting to go back and read the Declaration of Independence, which has, all men are created equal, but then it has this long list that each one of the items on the list starts with he, and they're talking about the king. He did this, he did that, he did this. And it's a very interesting list, and a lot of it echoes today. But in any case, what's happening is a enormous shift of power from the Congress, and to some extent the courts, to the executive. And it's funny, people say, well, Trump is trying to be a dictator. I think he thinks he is. He believes that he has the power to do whatever he wants as president. And it's telling that there have only been 4 or 5 bills passed by the Congress that he's signed in 6 months. Everything else has been executive orders. Executive orders aren't the law, but he acts like they are. And I get friends at home who are frustrated saying, why don't you throw sand in the gears? And I say the problem is the gears aren't turning because of this usurpation of power. And by the way, it's also an abdication by the Congress. And that's what's, to me, more dangerous in the long run than any particular policy that we may or may not like. That's an undermining of the essential structure of the government, which was there for a reason, because those guys knew that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. The one thing they didn't want. In fact, Madison said in the 47th Federalist, when you have the legislative, executive, and judicial power in one set of hands, that's a perfect definition of tyranny. He used that word, tyranny. This is very serious stuff. And then, okay, so that's my problem is more with the deeper what's going on structurally than the policies. On the other hand, a lot of the policies are really harming the country. I've really tried to stop and think, what made this country the most extraordinary success in human history? There are lots of reasons. One is access. People in this country, you have access. You don't have to be what your father was. You can achieve whatever ability you have. The other is our values that we have of honesty. Another is honest government, general lack of corruption. As I work on Armed Services and Intelligence Committee, I do a lot of work in other countries. Corruption is a curse around the world. It's one of the worst things. Is hobbling countries, and it really bothers me that the president is selling his own meme coin, and he's president, and he accepts a $400 million jet airplane. If that airplane had been a gift to the United States of America, as Air Force One, okay, that's I'm not crazy about the idea, but it wasn't. I mean, theoretically, it goes to the Defense Department for 3 years, then it goes to him, to his library. And by the way, it's going to cost $1 billion to retrofit to be Air Force One, so it's not really that great a gift. And there's this mood or atmosphere of making money off the government, which is not in our tradition. I think that's bothersome. The final piece is immigration. And what's happened in this country is a conflation of border security and immigration. Border security, I'm for. I think everybody, I don't think, this idea of I'm for open borders, that's never been true. You've got to have a policy at the border. You've got to be able to stop people from coming in, particularly if they're going to do you harm. But if you think about it, except for the African Americans who were brought here against their will and the Native Americans who were already here, everybody else are the descendants of wacky risk takers who were the people that left their village, whether it was in Italy or Africa or Asia or wherever, to come to this strange place where they didn't speak the language and find freedom and the opportunity. And to cut that off is to cut off what really has been the sort of energy and ideas that have made this country what it is. Look up Ronald Reagan's final speech. It's all about how immigration is the key to the success of this country. It's fascinating that he made this was his final speech as he was leaving office, and and by the way, anti-immigration is nothing new. There was a whole political party in the 1840s called the Know Nothings, and their whole thing was Catholic immigrants from Europe. And the Klan, people think of the Klan as racist. It was. We had the Klan in Maine in the 1920s, anti-Catholic and anti-immigrant. NINA was a sign in New York stores in the 1880s. It stood for No Irish Need Apply. So anti-immigrant sentiment is nothing new, but we've never had it elevated to a dominant public issue that demonizes the people who are coming here in order to find a better life and to contribute to our life. I mean, there's all kinds of data. The number of CEOs of major companies that are come here 1 or 2 generations from being immigrants, and to cut that off and to say, no more foreign students and cut off visas. And as I say, the confusion of the border problem with immigration generally is, I think, destructive of one of the things that's at the heart of what's made this country great.
So I think on the policy side, you've outlined what I would hope at least a lot of independent thinking Americans probably believe. I agree with you on the information asymmetry people are getting, are seeing pictures, they're gleaning things as a result of, unreliable sources. On the earlier part about our democracy, co-equal branches of government, the non-policy area, I was reading something recently, and I'm going to paraphrase, that a lot of people in 2024, a lot of voters were very concerned about the future of democracy, Trump's implication, authoritarianism, et cetera. You can use any word you want. But a lot of Americans didn't feel like the government that existed before Trump was working for them, right? Mm-hmm. And so the notion that Donald Trump is corrupt using executive orders or, whatever he was doing, Qatari jets, was not anything that surprised them or made them feel worse about the country. As a matter of fact, for a lot of voters, they just said to themselves, he's doing things different and he's shaking things up, right? Some nebulous feeling. And so not to pin it just on Maine, but as Maine voters who are independent thinking, when you talk to people in your state and you talk to those voters who, are very loyal to Donald Trump, or even people who have given him a shot in 2024 that didn't before, what can you say to them, or what do you think is compelling to those kind of voters that get them to think this through a little bit?
I'll touch on that, but what you say is a very important insight. I used to teach about leadership, and one of the things that I used to talk about was that leaders rarely create a movement. They climb on the wave. Martin Luther King didn't invent civil rights. It had been going on in this country, as long as there was Jim Crow, and it strengthened in the 50s, Brown versus Board, and Martin Luther King sort of coalesced and helped to grab onto a movement that was already there. Exactly the same thing with Donald Trump. He didn't create this movement of distrust of the government, anger, people feeling left behind, not listened to. He very skillfully, I think, instinctively sort of got onto that wave and has been very successful. So the question is, why does that wave exist? Why are people feeling that way? And I wish I could say that there was some simple answer. Congress wasn't listening to their mail or whatever. I think it's really complicated. There have been huge changes in this country in the past couple of generations. For example, it used to be in Maine we had a big textile industry. The textile industry moved south in search of cheaper labor into the Carolinas in the 40s and 50s, and then it went to Asia. But it took a generation. You see, it took time. Now change is occurring in single years or a couple of years, less than a decade, where an industry that was the basis of a town's economy suddenly goes away. And people are feeling they're feeling anxious, and the sort of certitudes have happened. The other thing that I think is the changing demographics of the country. And there's a feeling, one of the best analogies somebody shared with me was, if you're ever in a line to go to the movies, and when we used to go to movies, and you'd be in this long line, and you'd be waiting patiently and sort of, shifting from one foot to the other, and then you look up and you see a couple of people cutting in line in front of you, you're mad as hell. And many people, rightly or wrongly, feel that way, that people are cutting in front of them, that they're not getting their due. And there's this frustration. I mean, a lot of change has come on people very quickly.
And do you have a line or a conversation that you've had with people in your home state that you found to be compelling, that not just like a magic line, but just helps to make people realize a little bit more what you've been saying?
Well, I think what I try to share is that number one, I remind people this is a great country, and we have great people. And one of my facetious lines is, have you ever thought about the fact that we're a country that people want to break into? I've experienced countries where people want to break out of, and to try to there's so much emphasis on the negative, to try to remind people that we still have regular elections, we still public officials do listen to what the people want to tell them, but I don't think there's any magic cure to this, except to encourage people to be engaged, but to be engaged in a positive way, not in a this divisive, as I say, somebody who I disagree with politically is my enemy. That's one of my problems with the president is using terms like scum and Marxist and these judges must hate America. They don't hate America. They just have a different view of what the values are than you do. But that only serves to divide us. And it may be good politics, but it's bad policy. It's bad for the country. And that's what really is worrisome to me.
To your point on the view, our view among the world, I want to make sure to get to this chart to have you explain it.
Well, this was a chart that I just ran across in the last couple of weeks. This was an international organization that they polled 110,000 people worldwide in a whole variety of countries about perceptions of other countries. And I just thought this was sort of striking. You see America is the red line that is dramatically down. China's coming up. Russia's coming up. And that gets to something we really haven't discussed, and that is one of the mistakes of this administration, in my view, has been I guess the term would be dissing of our allies. I serve on armed services and intelligence committees, and I've come to realize that one of our tremendous asymmetric advantages in the world is allies. China has customers. We have allies. And for the president to be poking in the eye of the Europeans, imposing a 45% tariff on Japan and South Korea, which are some of our best allies, constantly sort of denigrating our allies in Europe, undermining support for Ukraine, which is an ally, it's diminishing one of our important assets in the world, which is our brand, our reputation as a place that values relationships. Canada, for Lord's sake. This president 5 years ago, 6 years ago, negotiated a trade agreement with Canada and Mexico. And a couple of months ago, he said this was a horrible agreement, and we've got to impose these huge tariffs on the neighbor. And he called it an emergency. I can tell you, we've got a major border with Canada and Maine, and there's no emergency. The only emergency is the Canadians coming across the border and being nice and offering free health care. I mean, that's a problem, man. That's annoying. But no, seriously. And again, to talk about what the administration is doing in terms of undermining the sort of fundamentals that has made the country what it is disturbing to me beyond the policies themselves. And that, to me, that chart is a pretty powerful example of the results. The inflection on that chart is 2024.
So my final question to you is, people see charts like this. I think they're not surprised by our standing in the world declining. Candidly, they don't see either party, and I don't have to say this to you, speaking to them. They see division. They see infighting. Democratic Party right now, there's a lot of infighting and figuring out what both the blame game of the past and the way forward. The Republican Party, a lot of them all of them right now are basically under the iron fist of Donald Trump and are only speaking ill of him behind the scenes to reports. And it's just manifesting in a lot of distress for the average voter, a lot of feeling of, why do I even want to be engaged in politics? So as someone who is an independent, who has more qualifications to be a so-called referee in D.C. than anyone else, what is your message to listeners who want to engage people who they know in their communities who are disaffected to get them back involved in politics again?
I think you use the key word as engaged, and not really try to overcome this we-they proposition that's hurting the country so much. It's unfortunate it takes an emergency to unite us, but we ought to be talking to one another and listening to one another. I think one of the you talked earlier about what the basis of Donald Trump's appeal and this anti-government. Part of it is I think people didn't feel listened to, and they want to. In my case, what people tell me is that I don't always agree with you, but I know you're trying to do the right thing, and you listen to us, and I think that's sometimes being lost because the parties are in their sort of in their own little worlds and only talking to each other, and I think the renewal has to come on a community basis. It's not going to happen here. What happens here is a reflection of what's going on in the community, and the communities have to start talking to each other and listening to one another and not demonizing each other. That's what one of the things that bothers me the most is I've got political disagreements with a lot of people, but I don't think that they're evil. I hate to see that words like that are being used to describe one's political people who don't agree with you. So I think, to get to your question, I think it's got to happen in the small towns and in the neighborhoods where people, sit around in a coffee house and say, what's bothering you about this, and also, and I put the burden on people. They've got to seek out the information. They've got to really dig to try to find what the truth is. And one of the problems with the current environment is that people are getting so frustrated they've given up on trying to find the truth. And that's a really bad place for us to be. If we care, there's nothing this country can't do.
Senator Angus King, thank you for coming to the People's Cabinet.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks, Dan.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the People's Cabinet. If you did, please like, subscribe, ring that bell, and put in the comments below who else you'd like to see sworn in. And stay tuned for new episodes every Tuesday. Let's go.